Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs, and all of us, members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, welcome to Robservations, episode number 351. I, of course, am your viceroy of verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, your sci-fi sommelier, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you with Robservations, a show about something, episode number 351. My God, it's Monday. It's another Monday. It's a good Monday. It's a Monday of success for people in the entertainment business, which I always like. I'm one of those people that I do not. What is it? Schadenfreude? Schadenfreude? I don't feel that way about other people's successes. I feel that whenever there's a success in the entertainment business, especially if it has something to do with science fiction, fantasy, and horror, we all win. Anybody who wants to work in that milieu, I include myself in that. So whenever someone has success, I think it's lovely. And no one is more deserving of success than Jason Blum and his team over at Blumhouse, because you know what they've done? They have brought back the viability of the low-budget genre film to the motion picture multiplex. They can put movies in theaters that cost very little money with a decent advertising budget behind them, and they can turn that into gold. Not unlike Rumpelstiltskin, I always like to say that I enjoy the fact that there is a bit of alchemy in movie making, and Blumhouse seems to have sort of cornered the market on that, and I think that's pretty wonderful. And that's what I wanted to talk about as I robcast to you from the Robservatory. Beware the Ides of March that are coming soon. And, of course, Super Tuesdays tomorrow. I hope you're all registered to vote. Now the Democratic field is down to 3. Wow, who would have thought, man? Is it down to 3? I think. It's Biden, Sanders, and Warren. Tulsi Gabbard, is she still there? I think she is. Anyway. So tomorrow is Super Tuesday. I always look forward to. They kind of change it up now in California. It's not like one day now. You can kind of lead up to it. But it's very exciting. You are voting, aren't you? I hope you're voting. Please vote. Anyway, I wanted to start off by talking about Jason Blum and Blumhouse. And, of course, Lee Wanell. We've been talking about his movie, his third feature after Insidious 3 and Upgrade, his film, The Invisible Man, which did very, very well. Now, either this could be a reboot or the beginning of a new Universal Dark Universe. I mean, I would love to see Bill Condon come back and do his version of what was he going to do with Bride of Frankenstein? Maybe now we'll know. Is Blumhouse going to completely take over the Dark Universe? They're going to reboot all of the Universal Monster properties? That could be cool. I really like to see what happened here because, as we know, worldwide, we're looking at almost a gross of $50 million. And with coronavirus outbreaks and all kinds of craziness happening, it was nice to see a film that cost, reportedly, the budget on this was $7 million. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that harks back, that's a little bit more, but that harks back to the days of the early 80s, when John Carpenter was making movies like Escape from New York for $4 million. And it's just great to see. It's great to see that you do not have to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at a movie to have people turn out. Now, is that going to change studio tentpole filmmaking? No. There are certain films that are just going to cost what they're going to cost. As John Campea pointed out today on the John Campea Show, you can't make Avengers Endgame for $7 million. You could maybe pay for the catering budget for half the shoot. There's just no way. You can't do it. And that's fine. The studios are into making spectacles, and that is good too. That's what studios got to eat. And I understand, and I don't think it's wrong that if you're going to spend $150 million or $200 million on a Fast and Furious movie, you expect it to gross $1 billion. But remember, usually the formula for Hollywood is a movie has to gross 3 times what it cost to break even. So if you make a $7 million movie, if you make $21 million, hey, that breaks even. That's sweet. So you're looking at a movie like The Invisible Man, and that grosses almost $50 million worldwide in a weekend. That is an epic win for everybody. Everybody involved, it's an epic win for the studio. It's all good. Now, here's the thing. On a spreadsheet, as far as shareholders are concerned and how much have you made all year, you've made a profit of, let's say the movie only made $50 million and our break-even point is at 21 million. So let's just say you got 30 million left over. That's a healthy profit, but there's also studio overhead. There's all kinds of things, but let's just assume for the time being you got a $30 million profit. Well, depending on how much you make, I mean, if a studio only releases 10 movies a year and you make 30 million profit on those 10 movies, you're only going to come out with a $300 million profit. That's not a lot for a major motion picture studio, so I get it. They can't survive making movies with that kind of profit margin. They need to make more money, obviously, because they're spending more money as well. Now, if the studios were only making that kind of money and only making those movies, that would be pretty good, but they're not. They're spending a lot more money. But even so, what this says to me is that the studios can be in the business of making horror films or genre films, great science fiction films, for less than $10 million. I mean, if they're good, you have to have the talent. Lee Wanell is, of course, one of the architects of the Saw franchise, which began almost 20 years ago. So he's definitely cut his teeth. He is a filmmaker. He's worked as an actor. He's worked as a writer. He's now worked as a director 3 times. And this is a man who he's paid his dues. Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir. The check is in the mail. He has. He's paid his dues, and he's made something good that audiences like. Now, here's the thing. I think that this is a great way for studios to cultivate new talent. Now, the problem is making movies and making good movies and making movies as good as Invisible Man is really, really hard. So I'm not saying that everybody should get a chance. But here's a way. I think all studios should have a Blumhouse. All studios should have Jason Blum has made movies to see if they've worked or not. He's put up money for movies that end up being direct-to-video or going right into streaming, or he'll make movies even cheaper than that for Hulu or whatever it is he's doing. But it's a great way to incubate new talent. And I think that's what we need. And if we can keep doing these kinds of things, I think it's terrific. Where other studios, there are no low-budget movies being made in other studios. I've told the story before about how a film I produced, The Hills Run Red, was part of a program at Warner Brothers where they were making direct-to-video movies around a $4 million range, and they were putting them out direct-to-video, and later they would be on cable if they ever showed up on cable, and they were making movies that way, and then Warner Brothers pulled the plug on that. Our film was part of a Silver Pictures. Joel Silver was our executive producer, and they were going to make 10 of those movies. And they had one in production, their third of 10, Cheerleaders in Trouble, that had the plug pulled. So it was never made. But it was a way. Dave Parker, of course, directed that film. And maybe, who knows, I hope one day it'll be coming out on Blu-ray at some point. But you never know. We'll see. And it's pretty great that these movies are being made at Blumhouse. Now, there's an article that came out in Variety today by Owen Gleiberman, and I've liked Owen Gleiberman's columns, but this article is interesting. And this article says, I want to read it to you. It's from yesterday, and it says, the headline is, "The Success of the Invisible Man Reveals the Fallacy of Get Woke, Go Broke." Now, I thought that was pretty interesting. But I wanted to read this article, a little bit of it, and talk about this. Allow me to have a drink of water. A Woman in Peril movie is not a new thing. Just think of Wait Until Dark, Eyes of Laura Mars, or Panic Room, and neither is A Woman in Peril movie in which the heroine, after being stalked and terrorized, takes charge and fights back. That was the scenario 30 years ago in Sleeping with the Enemy, a grindingly effective but rather reductive B-movie that became a success in the summer of 1991, mostly because it was the first film designed as a dramatic showcase for Julia Roberts after Pretty Woman. You could say that the premise of just about every Woman in Peril movie is that toxic masculinity is out there, that it's scary and violent and dangerous, and that it's coming for you. That was true decades before the term toxic masculinity was invented. But when you watch The Invisible Man, the fearful and cunning new thriller starring Elizabeth Moss as a woman who fights off the cat-and-mouse stalking moves of a man she can't see, a man who therefore to everyone else doesn't exist. What's new is the heightened awareness of what it feels like, what it means to be a woman in trouble whom no one believes. That's what makes the film an expression of the hashtag #MeToo world. On the level of sheer thriller logistics, The Invisible Man has been written and directed by Lee Whannell with a ticklish and suspenseful ingenuity. All the alarming tricks that Adrian, the raging sick puppy who Moss's Cecilia has escaped from, uses to torment and harass and manipulate her. But the dimension that lifts the movie above Sleeping with the Enemy or a glossy FX potboiler like Paul Verhoeven's Hollow Man is the dramatic finesse with which it turns Cecilia's predicament into a potent projection of something that's now at the heart of the culture. What I wanted to say is that her predicament, she's under attack but people think she's crazy because her abuser is supposedly dead and in reality invisible, works as a metaphor. But that's a pesky and pretentious word, one that can make it sound like you're taking a good night out at the movies and turning it into a New York Times editorial. Yes, part of the power of movies, even popcorn movies, is that they're encoded with metaphors that charge the experience of watching them with meaning. The issue of a woman not being believed when they level charges of harassment or worse has moved to the forefront of our national conversation. The Harvey Weinstein saga, a cultural earthquake if ever there was one, has had the effect of shaking loose 1,000 lies, of blasting through the corporate mechanisms of 1,000 cover-ups. The whole Weinstein scandal turned, in certain fundamental ways, on the question of belief. For too long, too many victims of his abuse were scared to come forward, in part because they feared, and with good reason, that they would not be believed. And the Weinstein trial was all about the issue of belief. The crimes were there, the testimony of the victims was there, but the reason that many sharp-eyed prognosticators expressed concern right up until the end that Weinstein might walk relates to the question of whether 12 ordinary jurors, faced with an overwhelmingly established pattern of monstrous behavior, would believe what they heard. When it comes to matters like this, the dismissal of women's claims has been habitual and institutional. You could say, though, that it's something more, that it's mythological. The reticence to acknowledge and to act upon the knowledge of sexually abusive behavior has been, to a degree, woven into the fabric of our society. Yet, this is the moment that the dyed-in-the-wool injustice is changing. And part of the power of a movie like The Invisible Man, in its diverting and not too serious but just serious enough way, is that it gives the shift in consciousness a workout. That's part of what makes it cinema. You sit in a theater with a bunch of other people, sharing the drama of this moment and these issues, doing it through the heightened lens of a thriller form and through the potent expression of Elizabeth Moss's traumatized heroism, and a certain catharsis of awareness takes place. No, the movie is not an editorial. It's a piece of entertainment. But when it's over, maybe you walk out with your empathy and your awareness of what's going on in the world a bit heightened. I stress that point because good popular movies, as often as not, tend to have a moral topical dimension, and when they connect, that's part of the reason why. We're not buying a ticket just to turn off our brains and escape. With a $29 million haul in its opening weekend, The Invisible Man feels overwhelmingly like a case of a movie with Me Too themes that has tapped into popular imagination. Yet over the last few years, Hollywood's mostly superficial on-screen attempt to deal with issues of women's empowerment has resulted in a track record dotted with box office failure, and this has given rise to a certain knee-jerk, misogynistic appraisal of that phenomenon. It goes back in a way to the Ghostbusters remake, which was greeted with an undisguised hostility before it was ever released. And when it turned out to be a so-so movie, it got beaten up on its failures, comedic and financial, somehow meant something. This has been, for Hollywood, a mostly awkward transitional time. Just look at the cringeworthy fake feminist banter of the Oscar telecasts, rightly skewered by my colleague Caroline Fromka. And the notion of doing gender-flipped remakes of movies that originally featured mostly male casts will probably go down as one of the more desperate expressions of it. I stand by my mild affection for Ocean's 8, and I even stand by thinking that Terminator Dark Fate was an invigorating reboot, but the essential point remains. Making movies like that is not a solution. Serving up a sixth Terminator film with a Terminatrix heroine or a less cosmetic Charlie's Angels shouldn't wind up penalizing or stigmatizing the primal idea of empowerment and inclusion in motion pictures. The commercial failure of these films means no more than the commercial failure of the reboots of Hellboy or Shaft did, but you can always find some wag who's drooling to add it up to the get woke, go broke tautology. In the context of a movie industry that is only just starting to change, that's myopic and it's also destructive, since it comes down to people grabbing at any excuse out there to avoid putting the experience of women at the center of motion pictures. So people didn't want to see another Terminator film or another Charlie's Angels. What the success of Invisible Man points to is how much they do want to see a movie that grapples urgently and entertainingly with who women are. So, okay. I couldn't help but think back to the very first movie I ever bought on home video 40 years ago. Talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it now. It was John Carpenter's Halloween. And it was the beginning, really. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the very beginning. We'd had other movies like Black Christmas. Hell, even Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a final girl in it. And it harks back to the central heroine of that movie was Laurie. I don't think we knew her last name was Strode until Halloween 2. But it was Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie, the babysitter. The most unlikely of heroines, a woman who didn't have a boyfriend like her friends did, wasn't sexually active, she was a virgin. But she triumphed in the end. I mean, some people might say, well, you know, it was Dr. Loomis who showed up and blew Michael Myers away, and that was what saved her. But no, I would say that the character of Laurie was a strong female character. She was still very feminine. She was nurturing, and indeed, she was really the mother of the piece because she was saving her two charges that she was babysitting. Well, there ended up being two charges there. And I would say that even in 1978, 42 years ago, you had a female protagonist that was an incredible female protagonist. When I was watching Halloween, I never thought to myself, well, you know, Laurie Strode is a character that I guess I'll reluctantly get behind because she's not a dude. No. When John Carpenter made Halloween, it was a coolly efficient, very well-crafted thriller that was relentless in its pace, and it made me believe in a character. I never once, when I was watching Halloween, it's a film where all of the major protagonists, other than Dr. Loomis, but the three friends, are women. I never thought to myself, well, this is a female empowerment movie. No, you were watching a story about these characters, these three friends, these three female friends. Never once did I stop. I probably watched my videotape 100 times. I showed everybody I knew. Every kid come over to my house and watch Halloween. I've seen that movie as many times as I've seen Star Wars or Dawn of the Dead or Animal House or whatever. But I never once thought to myself, well, this is a movie about girls, but I'm still going to watch it. No. It was just a movie about people. You just happen to be watching a film about girls, about female friends. And for me, I enjoyed movies like this. It wasn't like it was new. Carrie, you know, another film that's both the antagonists and the protagonist are females. You get a glimpse of I mean, I always liked movies with foxes, with Jodie Foster, you know, stories about female characters, teen girls, because I would learn something. I'm like, well, this is I'm gleaning, I'm learning important knowledge. What was important, we weren't living through the hashtag Me Too era. As a matter of fact, there's probably a lot of we were living through a time when look, men have been victimizing women and taking what they wanted from them for tens of thousands of years. Human history is full of bad behavior. It happens all the time, and it is time that this bad behavior, it's great that it's out in the open. It's great that we are evolving, and these things we need to go through all this. This needs to happen. However, I do think, again, like so much of the oppression that's going on that people are pointing to, we're better off now in our society than we've ever been. Does that mean there isn't more work to do? Of course not. But when it comes to suddenly it feels like it's necessary to somehow address these issues head on. But I think to myself, well, I understand that Halloween was written by John Carpenter, but you also had his producing partner Deborah Hill, who was a big part of John Carpenter's success at the time. And I think that what's really interesting, especially in the horror genre, women in peril have been around for over 100 years. And I think what's really interesting and what is so great about Halloween was, the idea of most babysitters at the time, even though I was a frequent babysitter in my own neighborhood because I like kids and I like the toys they had. And as I've talked about before on the show, I would choose who I would go babysit based on what toys they had, whether somebody had a full set of He-Man or G.I. Joes. It was great. And I did a lot of babysitting. I never thought less of it because I was a dude. And my mom somehow was able to get the best looking babysitters. I cannot believe people would come to my house if I knew I had a babysitter. So kudos to my mom for finding people like she did, because it was pretty incredible. I loved when a babysitter came over, let me tell you. But the thing was, Halloween is just a good movie. I mean, it might be dealing with these issues. Now, of course, we're living through a period of time that we can point to and go, this movie is it's a reaction or it's a reflection of our Me Too era. But I would say that horror films have always had a component of women in peril. Always. Certainly the entire slasher genre of the 80s was all about having a great final girl. And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, I mean, my God, all the movies, not just Halloween, Terror Train. I mean, there was all kinds. She was the it final girl. So I just think the important thing you can have your agenda, and you can certainly address these issues, but ultimately what you want is movies and stories and characters that are true to the story that's being told. And if it's not, audiences can you can see it. Now, I think, and I can't and I don't want to speak for anybody, but the gender-swapped female Ghostbusters film, I didn't have a problem with seeing that. I'm like, fine. The problem I thought, is that it just wasn't as good as it should have been. It wasn't as funny as it should have been, and it wasn't. You could even tell from the trailers that something was just off. And I think that one of the things that I objected to, and it seems sort of funny to say, was the characters. I didn't believe there was. It's funny to say in a movie like Ghostbusters that there was no verisimilitude, but I believed those guys. I believed between Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and Dan Aykroyd, there was a deadpan, the way they talked to each other. They weren't like, we're the wacky comedy. I mean, they were, but they played it straight, and it was in their inimitable way. I mean, sure, you had Slimer. I mean, how realistic can you be? But those guys and their friendship and the way they spoke, they sold it. I just didn't believe the female Ghostbusters. I didn't believe their costumes. I didn't believe their update of the Ecto-1. I just didn't believe any of it. And there was, I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe they didn't do a good job as Leslie Jones. I believed Ernie Hudson. I never believed Leslie Jones. I mean, you've got a character, a person of color as part of the team, and Leslie Jones just was too Leslie Jones for me. Whereas Ernie Hudson, I mean, even his lines were very funny, and the way he was the everyman, and it worked really. It was great. He was a great straight man, and I just feel that the female Ghostbusters, while I understand why they did it, I also think that you can't just, if you're going to gender swap something, gender swap it. Don't just turn characters female and not play into women and men are different. If you're going to play into and you're going to give us a character, make the character different and lean in to the differences between men and women. But you don't have to lean into them by disparaging. If you're going to have a female 00, that's fine. But as we've seen on the trailers already, Lashana Lynch is already, I'll shoot you in the leg that or the knee that works. I mean, it's why does a character then have to put down another character? You know, you don't have to do that. What was really interesting is if you look at something like Spy Who Loved Me, which of course came out in 1977 as a Bond film, you had Major Anya Amasova playing Triple X. She was Triple X, played by Barbara Bach. And one of the things about that film is she's the top Russian agent. She's the equivalent of James Bond. And sure, at the end of the day, they do have a couple of moments that are a little cringe now where Bond has to rescue her. But that's because it's James Bond and he's the hero of his movie. So there's nothing wrong with that. But as they're pitted against one another, they're shown as being almost equals, certainly intellectual equals. And that movie was made in 1977. So, you know, it's sort of interesting. And I think I understand now there's a lot of agenda filmmaking happening, whether it's Doctor Who, whether it's, but again, I have no problem with a female Doctor Who. What I have a problem with is that instead of telling great, compelling stories and developing the character of the Doctor, they violate my own axiom, the Burnett axiom. You never put your universe or your agenda ahead of your characters and story. Because your whatever point you're trying to make should be part of that story. Your story should have it all baked in. Whatever you want to deal with should be baked in. And one of the great things I think about The Invisible Man is they don't have to come out and say that it's part of this is a perfect movie about the Me Too era. No, Lee Whannell was concentrating on his story, his premise, and his characters. And he did a fine job of it. I mean, I remember when, in the mid-'80s, when Cronenberg's The Fly came out. And they talked about The Fly being, when it came out in 86, summer of 86, along with Big Trouble in Little China and Aliens. That was 20th Century Fox's big push that summer. And people were talking about that The Fly was a reaction to the AIDS epidemic. That was Rock Hudson had been diagnosed, and I think he had died. He'd passed away by then, and people were dealing with the AIDS epidemic and what it meant to society. And a lot of reviewers, I remember, were trying to turn The Fly into an allegory for AIDS. And indeed, you could look at it that way at that time. You certainly can. The same way you can look at The Invisible Man as an allegory for toxic masculinity and the Me Too era. But you can't then not go back and look at movies, as this article pointed out, as Owen Gleiberman pointed out, Sleeping with the Enemy was you could call it about toxic masculinity. Men have been victimizing women since the dawn of time. Back in the day, I'm sure when you had Cro-Magnon man, they would thump a woman over the head and drag her back to their cave with a club. You know, I mean, this is nothing new. But horror movies have a tradition of having women overcome the monsters and prevail in the end. Sometimes they don't prevail, but a lot of the times they do. Certainly the slasher genre was predicated on that. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the time the men in slasher movies were kind of portrayed as being dim-witted, and it led to their demise. Now, I never watched a movie back in the day going, oh, you know, can I get your ghost, Bob? My name was Bob, and I had to go watch a character with my name die in Halloween. He got put up on a door. I guess PJ Souls did get Bob's ghost after all. Of course, she died too. But I still think that ultimately these are genre tropes, and when they're utilized correctly, you come up with a great film. And that's what should be important, is that the movies that this whole get woke, go broke idea, well, it happens because what you're doing is you're not being true to the story that you're telling. And I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that when you see a movie like Invisible Man that is beautifully crafted, it's very well made on a budget, but it looks as good as any other movie. Really, really interesting, great use of visual effects and even practical effects. And I think what was really interesting is that I can't imagine Lee Wanell was sitting there as he wrote this script thinking, let me address the Me Too era and this agenda. No, what he was looking at was the whole rich history of horror films and how women have been imperiled in horror movies since pretty much the dawn of time. So what he was doing was going back and he was taking, and what did he do? Like all great final girls, he decided to craft a character that was in an impossible situation because nobody would help her, nobody believed her, and yet she had the resources and the wherewithal. She had to save herself. And that is a great and compelling story. And I think that's the kind of films that you want. And that's what we're looking for. And whether critics can say that it is a movie, it's a metaphor for AIDS, or it's a movie for the Me Too era, that's fine that they say that. But again, I don't think that's what Lee Wanell was doing on purpose. What he was doing was trying to make a kick-ass movie where the story that he was telling, and I talked about it last week on the show when everybody said, well, you have to show the domestic violence that she's suffering. In the beginning, that was a big note that everybody was trying to give him, and he smartly said, no. Why? You don't need to do that. The imagination of the horrors that she was suffering, we've all seen that before. And what it would do is it would immediately sort of, in a way, trivialize, I think, what she was going through. And by just showing her, she's out of there, man. That's how that movie begins. You always drop people into the scene late and get them out early. And that's exactly what Lee Wanell did. What he did was The Invisible Man is a triumph of great genre filmmaking. Low budget, great acting, tight script, tight running time, and it really works very efficiently. And that's what we should be celebrating, is a movie like this got made. Blumhouse, that Lee Wanell was able to get it made, that Blumhouse was able to put up the money, and that Universal released it, and they had a great P&A budget behind it, and it did very, very well. And it did very, very well because it was true to its own story. And that's what you need. And that's what I think is I think the most important thing when it comes to genre cinema. I really do believe that. And I don't think agenda filmmaking is always the best is the best way to go. I mean, sure, like if you want to tell a story like something like, I don't know, one of my favorite movies of the 80s, The Killing Fields, about Dith Pran and he was left behind and he suffered. That happened. I mean, when you're talking about human suffering and all that, you focus on a story that exemplifies what it is you're trying to show. And the actual situation itself was enough. You didn't have to make it all up. You didn't have to force an agenda there. It was the horrors of war. And it was built in. And I think when you try and force an agenda on anything, it just doesn't work. That was a problem I had with a lot of the Twilight Zone. I mean, you know, a movie like Get Out, Jordan Peele's Get Out, clearly had an agenda. However, that's fine, but it worked. The story was true to itself, and it allowed, the premise was allowed to be shared through the story that was being told. And so the story that was being told carried that premise through. And they didn't stop necessarily. I mean, let's face it, Get Out was pretty preachy. I get it. But it was also great. And I loved it, and it didn't allow its messaging to get in the way of the horror story that it was telling, because it was baked in. And I thought that was a great film. Anyway, I know that some of you have been sending in some chats here, so allow me to read them. Let's see. Oh, there's a few more here. Seymour Butts sent in a tip and said, "Hi, Rob. I love the show. I had a question only you can answer." Well, because I don't know anyone else. What is the difference between a producer, an executive producer, a co-producer, and a line producer? I've answered this question a lot, but I'll never stop answering it. I have no problem with which to do that. So let's start with executive producer. Usually, an executive producer is, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to start with producer. A good producer, a real producer, is a person that finds a project and shepherds it into existence. Actually is going to make it. And a great producer finds material and sees it through, whether it's a book, whether it's a great screenplay, whether it's a newspaper article, whether it's just a great idea. A great producer will find that idea and make sure it happens. And whether that producer goes to a studio and finds financing, goes the independent route and finds financing, then a producer usually hires the people as well. A good producer will first find a great director. If the producer's not directing the project himself, will find a great director, and then they're off to the races. They'll have to go find their money. They'll place it with a studio. They'll get indie financing. It'll go to a mini major, wherever. So that's what a really good producer does. And that producer, who is a working producer, will work on that film all the way through when it is completed. That means we'll be there for production, we'll be there through post-production, and all the way to the release. Theoretically, that's what a producer will do. Now, there are people that get producer credits that have something else to do with the movie, which brings me to the executive producer. Usually, an executive producer is someone that facilitates what the producer is trying to do, either by providing the money and financing. Like, a producer will go to somebody and say, I'm looking for the money, or I'm looking for a studio or distribution or whatever, and the person that can then arrange for the money or somehow finances the film, they become the executive producer, because they're not going to actually work on the movie itself necessarily, although some do. But mostly executive producers are hands-off. A lot of them can be, but I'm just saying, so then the producer takes what the executive producer brings to the property, and that can be a lot of things. It's not just necessarily money. If sometimes you might need a big star and their manager or their agent or somebody, usually it shouldn't be an agent, but somebody who might facilitate you getting a star will get an executive producer credit, because that's almost as good as somebody finding the money for a project. Sometimes, though, executive producer credits are given out to people for whatever reason. But usually, for the most part, executive producers have something to do with making sure that the package is put together to move forward. Helps the producer get the elements they need to get the movie made and then later distributed. A co-producer, like when I was co-producer on Agent Cody Banks, single card, by the way. I'm the only single card credited producer on the Agent Cody Banks franchise. What I did was we purchased the script. We found the script, me and two other partners at the time. We found the script for Agent Cody Banks, and we bought it. Now, we bought that script. We then hired writers in Zach Stentz and Ashley Miller. We found writers that they went on to write Thor and X-Men First Class together. They rewrote the script. And we were fully intending on producing that movie. Then we found other producing entities to help us make the movie. And then it eventually went to MGM. We sold the property to MGM. And because we are, as partners and the other people that we brought in, we couldn't really get our act together, we were relegated to executive producers and co-producers on our own project, because we were not, you got to have a unified front, kids. So anyway, I got my co-producer credit, and the movies got made. But we came up with the script, we developed the script, and sold it to the studio. Unfortunately, just make sure if you're going to do that, there is no dissent in the ranks of your partners. So if there is, then you don't deserve to produce the movie, and that's kind of what happened. And I actually blame Danny Gold, who was one of my two partners. It was me, Kerry David, and Danny Gold. Danny Gold became a turncoat and an idiot and cost us a lot of money because of his own ego. And I'll say it flat out. And it was not a great period of time in my professional life, and it resonates even to this day. But we got two movies made. We got Cody Banks made, and we got Cody Banks Destination London made in a year, which is pretty great. So as a producer, I'll take that. Now, a line producer is somebody who is actually working on the film day to day, hand in hand with the producer. And while the producer handles more of the macro elements of a movie, and also works with the line producer. A line producer is making sure that the entire production on a day-to-day basis moves very smoothly. Whereas a producer and for instance, on a big blockbuster movie, you'll have usually a producer or producers, and the line producer are working hand in hand all the time. But a line producer is managing the production on all the micromanaging the production, every little thing that needs done, all the logistics, moving people, machines, and everything. That's what a line producer is doing. They're on a film entirely during production. Usually a line producer is not necessarily there during post, but they can be. Line producers can be there during post, but a line producer is crucial to the success of getting your movie made. A line producer is a working man. Well, there you go. Seymour Butts. I appreciate you asking the question, and thanks for the tip. Paul Gilmore also tips and says, hey, Rob, which would you rather be on a production, a director or a producer, and why? Well, first of all, look, from a creative standpoint, you're the director. You know, you want to, when you're a director, you're working with your cinematographer, you're working with your actors. It's very creatively gratifying. You're picking the shots. However, as with the case with The Hills Run Red, I wanted to produce a movie myself through my company. So when the opportunity was given to me to produce this movie, that's absolutely what I wanted to do. And the first thing that I had to do in that process was to make sure that I had a good director. And I did that with my friend Dave Parker. He directed The Hills Run Red, and he had a vision for it. Every good producer has somebody that has a vision for it, and Dave Parker had a very strong vision. He really wanted to make a slasher movie, and more than that, he wanted to create a new slasher that we hadn't really seen before, that was a little different than ones that had come before. So I think he really did that with Babyface. Even though we'd seen people like in Valentine wear a Babyface mask, it wasn't like what Dave was going for. And it was a lot of fun. And that was a project. As a producer, I set out to make this movie. Eventually, we were going to make it for $350,000, and we sold it to Warner Brothers. And luckily, they didn't just pay us off. Dave got to continue. He directed the film, and I got to produce it. And we went to Bulgaria and actually made the movie. And I got to be a part of the entire process that way. And that is why I get a single card credited producer on The Hills Run Red. My company, Ludovico Technique, also has a possessory credit in the front. And I was very happy about that. So on that project, I was content to be a producer. But I think it's a little bit more fun if you have, for me, it's more fun to direct because, you know, you're making the creative shots. Now, a producer can be creative as well, but a producer, look, on set, now I think, in a way, on these big tentpole movies, the director has been a little bit sort of diminished. But a producer's real job is to make sure that all of his people have what they need to execute the vision of the director that producer has hired. That doesn't mean a producer can't have a vision on his own, because he can. Absolutely, or she can. But a producer's job is to make sure that his director, his actors or her actors, and her crew or his crew have exactly what they need to realize the vision the producer had in the first place. So part of a producer's creative job is to make sure that he's got the best or she's got the best people in place for the job that they're trying to do. But given a choice, I would much rather direct than produce, but I do like producing. In the case of Tango Shalom, I was a producer on it, and I really have enjoyed facilitating, now as also the editor, facilitating the vision of director Gabe Bologna, which is terrific. So there you go. Willow sends in a tip and says, off topic, but are you concerned about the coronavirus? If this becomes a full-blown epidemic here, it's probably better to get infected now than later when all the hospitals get flooded. Also, Corona Beer might want to consider renaming their brand. First of all, I have to say, I'm not really concerned about getting the coronavirus. I would prefer not to. Right now, obviously, I think over 3,000 people have died now worldwide, but I'm not really concerned about it yet. There's just ways you have to live your life. You have to be careful when you're going out into public. I have bought my tickets for No Time to Die. I hope it doesn't have that. I hope it's not disrupted the release. But for the most part, you just have to be careful. I'm not really worried about the coronavirus. I mean, look, if it turns into Spanish influenza and what happened in 1918 to 1920, if 50 million people die, yes, I will be very concerned. But right now, it has a 2% fatality rate or something like that. Unless it gets higher, I'm not going to worry about that yet. I mean, there's enough. There's enough to worry about. I could get hit by a bus. I could get struck by lightning. I could have terminal cancer right now and not even know it. I am not going to allow my life to be disrupted by worrying about the coronavirus. If I end up getting the coronavirus and there is a 2% chance that I could die, well, then I'll worry about it then. But I can't spend my life worrying about the coronavirus right now. That's just, yes, one other thing I'm going to have to worry about. No. I won't do it. But I'm not going to stick my head in the sand. I'm going to be very aware and very careful about what goes on. I mean, my home state of Washington's had 4 deaths now in the last 2 days. This is a real thing. This is a very real thing. It's bad, and it should be taken very seriously. And I think that, unfortunately, with the current administration, the way that the Centers for Disease Control, it's so interesting to me. Once again, Americans are playing catch up when it comes to these kinds of things. I mean, look at the Japanese response. Schools are closed. Boom, you put a lid on it. We need to get in front of these things. That does not mean we have to not fund the Center for Disease Control. You don't fire your first response team to pandemics. You don't let them go. These are going to happen more and more. We're going to need, we need to play, Americans need to understand the value of, when it comes to medicine, preventative medicine is the best. You get out in front of something before it's a problem. We always wait until after it becomes a problem. When are we going to learn? I don't know. Anonymous sends in a tip. Hey, Rob, I'm a few days late, but I heard you talk about the new X-Men run the other day, and I have recently found myself reading more comics than watching TV. However, I must admit, I've never read too much of the X-Men. Where would you recommend I start? Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I thought Jonathan Hickman's miniseries, Power of X and House of X, was redefining the X-Men in a very interesting way. And they're moving forward with their books now, the regular books that are coming out, that is continuing that new era of X-Men, and we're overseeing it all. It's very interesting. But I cannot recommend a noob start reading those books, because they do require, look, the X-Men have 40 years of lore, more than 40 years of lore, actually. I mean, if you go back to the 60s, the X-Men go way back. But I would suggest, obviously, that you look into, X-Men history. And you've got to really be familiar with the Chris Claremont run on X-Men. He really created and defined so many of the modern X-Men characters. A lot of the 80s defined what those characters are. There's been a lot of new characters since then. But, I would suggest you can Google what are the most classic X-Men titles to read, and you can easily pick them up. Most of that stuff, I've got most of the X-Men omnibuses that have been collected, so they're all out there, and you don't have to buy the expensive hardcovers. You can get the soft covers, but I would suggest, reading the classic X-Men runs, and there's been a lot of them, and they're fun. You find the storylines like, of course, the Dark Phoenix storyline, the Mutant Massacre storyline. There's even a cool X-Men versus Avengers comic, but there's a lot there. But before you jump into the new Hickman era of X-Men, you really have to familiarize yourself with that. And I think I would start with the Claremont era. I mean, people would say that Giant Size X-Men is where to start. Was it number 1? But yeah, go there and even read things like Avengers Annual 10, which is one of my favorite comic books of all time, where it introduces Rogue, and she takes Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers' power. So check that out. Magic K sent in a tip and said, because of the recent AO3 archive of our own incident happened in China, I decided to write a letter about it. It's about the reflection of toxic fandom and the abuse of power. I will send it to you later this month. I'm not really familiar with the archive of our own incident. I'd love to know. Please send in a letter. For those of you who are interested or want to send in letters to the Burnettwork to be read live on the show, you can always send me letters at Robservations at theburnettwork.net. There's a place to send in those letters on the website. By the way, if I don't read your letter on the air, it's a pretty good bet your letter did wind up on the website, so people can comment there and check it out. JB Bonifacio sends in a tip and says the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo is finally out, and I'm beyond excited. For me, the 1997 original was the gateway to video games, being a narrative and about characters you grow attached to as opposed to playing a game for the sake of being a game. Well, JB, I know. I mean, not only that, I think the Final Fantasy games were responsible for a lot of women becoming gamers as well. And I played a little of Final Fantasy VII. I really liked that game. And I have not seen the remake demo, but I would like to. I'd totally play that. I think it's great, and I'll definitely look into that. You know, I really liked it when I was able to get like Ico and in the Shadow of Colossus, or the Shadow of Colossus for PlayStation 3. I love when they remake video games and they're cool, as long as they retain the core of what made those games good, and of course the great gameplay. Movie Fanobi sent in a super chat and said, "Happy Monday, Rob. March is coming at you like Gojira." Yes, it is. And by the way, I don't know if you've seen around the net, it was reported that King Kong versus Godzilla had screened. They'd done a test screening. And Adam Wingard, apparently the director, was very happy. He tweeted out a picture, and it's being reported that the movie played like gangbusters. Lean, mean, under 2 hours. I am so excited about King Kong versus Godzilla. Woohoo! Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, a big spectacle movie can be great, but it still needs great characters and a story to support the spectacle. Otherwise, it implodes under its own weight. Stubble continues and says, women in peril are more interesting from a storytelling perspective compared to men in peril. Totally agree. The perceived conflict is bigger and the story itself becomes more interesting. Well, absolutely. And, you know, I hate to say this, but I think one of the reasons that women in peril movies are more effective is that there is a biological impulse amongst, you know, men. We might have toxic masculinity, of course, but there's also an impulse to protect a woman. And I think men especially are drawn in when you're watching a great women in peril film like Invisible Man, or you're watching Halloween. You want the woman to succeed because there is no man to protect her in the story. So you want to be that guy as you're watching it. Like I feel tremendous empathy when I'm watching these female characters undergo horrific the stakes, and I'm powerless, and I like seeing a woman triumph because we are biologically, I think, as men, wired to help a woman. We know that. I think there is an instinct that we want to protect. We have to. If we don't protect women, then the human species does not get perpetuated. So I think it is more interesting. I love movies with female protagonists. And to answer your first question, yes, a big spectacle movie can be great, but yes, it has to be true to itself. It has to be true to itself. And if it's not good, man. I don't like when that happens. I don't like when movies aren't good. AJ Lancaster sends in a tip and says, to everything said so far, hell yeah. I put on today's stream as I started working on a spec script for my vision of a remake of The Birds that has a metaphor of women in STEM careers, where the original had messages about women entering the workforce. I think that's a really interesting, that's an interesting idea. See, that to me is something that's exciting. Because, you know, you can make a commentary about something. And I think women in STEM careers, there's been a lot written about women in the sciences who, you know, they're not they're not treated as well as their male counterparts. And how are we going to get women and how are we going to encourage women to go into STEM careers, which I think is a great idea. And that's really interesting. To me, I look, I love movies about women I love women scientist movies. I didn't like it, like in Contagion, where my boo Kate Winslet, I've never met her, but Kate Winslet, I'm a huge fan. When she died, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Soderbergh's Contagion, I was upset. That upset me because I identify with female scientist characters in movies, and I never want anything bad to happen to them unless it becomes so bad that you have a morbid curiosity to see what's going to happen. Kind of like what happened to Noomi Rapace in Prometheus. I mean, that was hardcore. Yeah, I was like, oh, because it's an alien movie. I mean, I'm sorry. When you see an alien movie, you want to see some alien shenanigans go on. But I had no idea what was going to happen when she gave herself her own alien abortion. Yeesh. Man, that was cool, though. I didn't expect that, but I really like that. But that's cool. So, AJ Lancaster, I think that's a really good idea. I'm behind what you're going to do there. Journey's End sent in a super chat and said, GB 2016, Ghostbusters 2016 misjudged the franchise as only a comedy and then interpreted that comedy as a Judge Apatow-style improv-a-minute slapstick comedy. That's what was insulting, not the female leads. You are absolutely correct. I completely agree with you. I thought that you're absolutely right, because I would say that Ghostbusters was there's also true horror elements in there. And I agree. I thought the improv slapstick really hurt Ghostbusters. I mean, it really, really did. And there was an element of one of the things about Ghostbusters that I really liked is that by the main characters, the four main Ghostbusters, playing it relatively straight, it allowed the absurdity and the humor of, because remember when the ghost first appears in the library at the beginning of the movie, it's really scary. It's legitimately straight up, that apparition was scary, and that was good. And they did that. The terror dogs were scary. Gozer was sort of scary. Are you a god? I mean, and then of course the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was hilarious, but there was still an element of it started out, Dan Aykroyd was trying to save the world there, and it went horribly awry. But you're right. You're absolutely right. That, and again, it was not about the female leads. It was the fact that they were in a slapstick comedy, and that comedy wasn't good. Sam O'Neill sent in a super chat and said, if I have a conversation and a movie comes up that you have done, is it acceptable for me to say, hey, I know the guy that directed or worked on that movie, like Agent Cody Banks or Brandon Superman? Sure. But, I would like it if you're going to say that. When I worked on a film where I was the documentarian, such as X-Men, or I mean, X-Men 1 I didn't work on. I did documentaries after the fact. On X-Men 2, while I was the documentarian, I was actually on set while they were shooting. So I would say, yeah, I worked on that movie. Superman Returns, I was there on set. My team and I were on set for Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So yeah, you could say that I worked on those movies, but I'm not Agent Cody Banks. I was a producer. We bought the script. We did find that material. So Hills Run Red, I was the producer. I was there while that movie was being made. Free Enterprise, of course, I did direct it. Femme Fatales, I directed those. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem. I would say that, while my career has been varied, it hasn't had a lot of commercial success that I would have liked, but still, sure, I've worked on a lot of things. I'm very proud. I mean, one of the things that I'll just flat out state is one of the things I think this channel can bring to this space is I have done a lot of work on movies and television. And even before I was in, say, above the line positions, I worked as a PA. I was the art department production assistant on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I learned a great deal. I was out there building sets and painting things and hauling lumber. And I worked on a number of movies. I worked on Army of Darkness. I worked on Mick Garris's Sleepwalkers. You know, I worked for Tony Gardner's Altarian Studios doing makeup. On the Swamp Thing TV show, I was painting Swamp Thing suits. You know, so I've done a lot of things. Full Moon's Arcade, I edited that. So sure, you know, I don't know if anybody will be impressed by it, but absolutely. Tell people what you want. But that's what I think this YouTube channel, I can bring you that perspective. I hope that that's what sets me a bit apart from other people. Joseph is here. Joseph, how are you, sir? Joseph says, oh, hi, Rob. What Bond girl did you find the most attractive in the Bond movies from GoldenEye to Spectre? My number one is Famke Johnson, is Xenia Onatopp. How can she not be with what she does with those legs? And a close second is Monica Bellucci in Spectre. Well, I have to say, wow, that's tough. You know, I liked Electra King a lot, Sophie Marceau. I did like Xenia Onatopp, but I gotta go with Eva Green, man. I gotta go with Eva Green from Casino Royale. She was smart, she was sexy, she was vulnerable, and she was the money. In more ways than one. I really liked Eva Green a lot. I mean, you know, maybe she's not, and I have to say, I loved Olga Kurylenko in Quantum of Solace. I find her, she's so sexy, but again, capable, smart, was able to hold her own. I really liked I liked her a lot, even though that movie doesn't get nearly the love that it deserves. What can you do? What can you do? See, there it is. I'm coughing. Coronavirus. No, I feel pretty good. I don't think I have the coronavirus. Victory Unlimited show is here. Victory Unlimited, send in a super chat. We love when Victory Unlimited show is here, just because I get to say Victory Unlimited show. Like that. With long-running franchises like Star Trek and James Bond, there's been an aggressive effort to deconstruct them, pissing off loyal fans by fundamentally changing them from what they were originally. Has this ever worked? No. No, it hasn't. Victory Unlimited show is asking a very good question. I've been saying on the show from the beginning, one of the big problems with Star Trek is that they continually try and change it into something that it's not. Right now, we're going through a period of time where heroes are being deconstructed, where everyone's like, well, you know, for whatever reason, we can't have heroes. My God, that's terrible. What a silly thing. What a silly thing to not have heroes. And I agree. I don't think it's ever really worked. You don't. Why do you want to deconstruct heroes? And they've been trying to do it with James Bond. I have to say that one of my problems with the James Bond era of Daniel Craig's era as the character is he never got a movie where he, certainly not this, not no, as much as I want to see No Time to Die, Bond is retired. We never got a Daniel Craig movie where he just straight up had a mission and accomplished that mission. He was always angsty or something was happening. And I feel like that's kind of a bummer. We never got a Star Trek movie where the characters were straight up, there wasn't, Kirk was Star Trek Beyond. Kirk was, I'm bored. I'm going to retire. I mean, then we had Khan and he was demoted. And then, of course, we saw the beginning of their career. I think one of the big mistakes, part of the reason that I think that the Kelvinverse movies never worked is we never got to see a movie where those characters were all working together. They just weren't very likable. Kirk was kind of a dick. Spock was angry all the time, and we spent way too much time on his dysfunctional relationship with Uhura. There was never a time when you could watch these characters be heroic. And I think that's a problem with a lot of these franchise movies. There's certainly a problem with the Star Wars sequels. We never got a movie where Luke, Han, and Leia were their heroic selves later on in their lives. You didn't have that. It's so strange to me because this is so easy to understand. and you fundamentally change somebody. How is that? Look, I get it. You see a movie like Unforgiven, where William Money, the character Clint Eastwood plays, is what Unforgiven does is it plays on the entire Western genre. And we watched the genre. The Western genre did not stay the same because the Old West sort of went away. It was a genre that was beloved in America. It was on television, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, Have Gun Will Travel. How long did these shows last? And then as the genres changed, they fell from favor. So what was really interesting is a movie like Unforgiven is a commentary on where the Western genre was at the time it was released back in 92. But a lot of these movies where they're trying to deconstruct our heroes, they haven't fallen. I mean, sure, they're old. They've been around, whether it's Doctor Who, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Star Trek. These are genres that the comic book superheroes, whatever. These are characters that have been around for a long time. But trying to deconstruct them is so strange because I know these new writers, they want to put their imprimatur on it. They want to make it different. Well, sometimes you've got characters, or filmmakers that understand. Ryan Coogler knew, when he made Creed, he knew how to, he made maybe a softer, gentler character in Adonis Creed that was maybe a little bit more well-heeled because he was Apollo Creed's son. But Ryan Coogler was able to make Creed and give it so much heart and create new characters, and still Adonis Creed was a hero. He was a hero. And it was a classic Rocky story. No one came in and said, well, we have to reinvent this story for the modern age. And I think you're right. When you're fundamentally trying to change what something is, I mean, if you're going to work in that sandbox, you got to work in the sandbox. And I think you're right. I don't think that a lot of it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Jack Frost sent a super chat and says, Vajazzle, Vajazzle, Star Trek Picard, what the fuck? First of all, I couldn't believe that when I heard that. By the way, that is the villain character from the last episode, or 2 episodes ago, the 5th episode of Star Trek Picard. Yeah, look, as somebody who relentlessly made fun of vajazzling for those of you who don't know what vajazzling is, you know what? You can imagine. Just look it up. It's pretty silly. I mean, all I could think about was when I looked at vajazzling was it would just get stuck in your teeth. And that's not, when you're doing good work, you don't need stuff to get stuck in your teeth. You know what I'm saying? But, and I'm telling you, I do good work. And I think that I don't understand why Bejazzle, what? I couldn't even, I cracked up every time somebody said that on that episode of Picard. And again, I don't know if that was a joke in the writing staff. I have no idea, but yeah, not good. I have no idea, and I'm with you. I'm still laughing about that even now. I even read it. Bejazzle, Vajazzle. We're gonna do it. Who knows? Mark Chure sent in a super chat. Thank you, sir. If you want to start reading the X-Men, start with Roy Thomas and Neil Adams run. Go into the Chris Claremont, Dave Cockrum, John Byrne run, and then stop. Everything afterwards is just confusion. Well, I've got a lot. I liked a lot of what went on. I did. I read a lot of those stories, and I think there's a lot of good X-Men stories to be had. But you're probably right. But I'm just thinking, if you want to read the new versions, you have to have a little bit more. You have to have a little bit more knowledge. But you're not wrong. And yes, if you're starting with Giant Size X-Men, I think you're starting with Roy Thomas and Neil Adams, right? But that goes back. The Claremont era is where really, because he did create a lot of the modern X-Men characters. But yeah, I mean, classic X-Men, Roy Thomas and Neil Adams. I'd say you're right about that. Bad Robot sends in a super chat and says, what is the difference between a film series and a film franchise? Well, I think a film franchise, I mean, they're kind of the same thing. But, I think like the Pink Panther movies, the Peter Sellers Pink Panther movies, Inspector Clouseau, I think those are a film series. because there's no video games, there's no tie-in novels, there's no toys. I think a franchise has more going on beyond just the film series. At least that's how I would look at it. Now, are there film franchises or they spin off like the Fast and the Furious franchise? Sure, there's merchandising, but now that there's Hobbs and Shaw, that's definitely a franchise. It's now got a spin-off. So if something has a spin-off, it's a franchise, I think. But there have been multiple. I mean, I think of the franchises. There were film franchises that didn't call themselves franchises in the past, like Planet of the Apes. Huge merchandising component. I think the Planet of the Apes films were, in fact, a franchise. It spawned a TV show, both an animated series and a live-action TV show. Definitely a franchise. So I think a film franchise has interest beyond just being films. There's a secondary market. At least that's what I would say, I think. But that's actually a good question. Carlos Fontes, it's Fontes. I think Fontes. I'm in the Tampa Bay right now. Is it weird that I want to watch World War Z, Contagion, Outbreak, etc.? No. Because what do great stories do? They help us make sense of what happens. And by the way, one of my favorite subgenres of genre fiction is diseases. I love diseases. I love vectoring. I love seeing how they spread through populations. I'm fascinated by that and how that happens. It's a result of being alive on this planet. And I love stories about the fall of civilization because of virulent pandemics. I want to go back and watch The Stand again. I want to read the book again. I want to read Graham Masterton's Plague again. I think Contagion is actually a pretty realistic look at something like this. I mean, Outbreak is, of course, more of an action movie. World War Z, same. But Contagion it's pretty clinical. But I don't think it's weird that you want to watch it. I don't think it's weird you want to watch it. I do too. I feel the same way. Mark C. sent in a $10 super chat and says, the problem with 2016 Ghostbusters wasn't just that we wanted men over women. It was that we wanted those men. We wanted Murray, Aykroyd, and Hudson. I think you're right there as well. I mean, how can you not? Those classic Ghostbusters characters are so great. And I have to tell you, I think Ghostbusters 2 is it's lame. I know some people like it, but I thought the special effects were subpar. I thought the humor was subpar compared to Ghostbusters. And it's not like Ghostbusters is not some genius movie either. It's not certainly not perfect. But I think you're right. I mean, that's what people wanted. You're absolutely right. It's not, and Ghostbusters, the all-female Ghostbusters, was fighting against that. I think that definitely was true because everybody loves Ghostbusters. Who doesn't? And I think you're probably right about that, Mark. I think you are. I think you're right about that. Let's see, and I've got letters. And let me read you a letter. Let's see. I've got letters from people. This letter comes from Clive Hibbert. Hail, Rob, our Viceroy of Verisimilitude, sommelier of sci-fi, Uatu, the watcher of the Imaginarium. Let me restate the obvious. Indulging in a conversation about science fiction fantasy should be fun. If we're talking about the Seattle Seahawks, Star Wars, skiing, sailing, Batman, the Lord of the Rings, or the New Yankees, we should immediately understand that the conversation should be fun. Or, taken with a grain of salt, we're not trying to solve cancer. We're not trying to make more widgets. We're just taking a break from politics, religion, and work. The enmity Yankee fans have for Red Sox fans should always be rooted in fun. As a lifelong Yankees fan, I do not get a dividend when they win, and I've never personally impacted the end result of a game. No matter what hat I wear when Aaron Judge bats. Your discussions about Star Trek are important to many fans all over the world, including me. Your perspective is unique and essential. Star Trek, the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise are culturally significant intellectual properties. As you stated, Star Trek was philosophically aspirational. It is rich in lore and does not need the injection of tropes from other franchises. I do not believe that J.J. Abrams needed to abandon the core themes of Star Trek or destroy the Romulan homeworld to make Star Trek cool again. Now, I understand that the producers of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard have the creative and legal authority to produce whatever kind of Star Trek they're cleared to. If you feel like it, fine. But you should not fear criticism. You should just demand better. Remember, Rob, when they, your critics, hear your message, which is critical of the things they love, they simply double down. On the left and the right, the tribes fear being wrong. They refuse to give an inch to the other side. Many defend new Star Trek because out of ignorance, they believe it represents them. They do not know that Star Trek, the original series Federation, was more progressive and aspirational. They hear a cacophony of criticism and simply choose to lash back. They did not do their homework and watch the original Star Trek, so they don't understand. Rob, you exemplify what is best. You're interested in the conversation and open to new ideas. CBS needs to hire you for a Star Trek Deep Space Nine revival. I don't know. I would hope they would hire Ira Bear first, but I'd like to be a part of it. I enjoy all of the topics you've brought up. Stay cool and carry on. He writes, P.S. Now witness the firepower of this armed and fully operational Robservations station. I don't know why that hit me just fine. That's very funny. Yes, I think it's time for a t-shirt. That comes from Claude Ray Charles Hibbert. Well, first of all, I do appreciate the kind words. Yeah, you know what? I love debating Star Trek with people. But what I find, and there's a couple of people that online that are always coming after me with interesting ideas, but they're convinced that they're absolutely right. People say, well, Rob, you seem to think you're absolutely right too. Well, I don't think I'm always right, but I do think I have a problem with the way a lot of people come after or want to deconstruct Star Trek. Like, for instance, it's really easy to say from our perspective that as progressive as Star Trek was at the time, the original series also has a lot of sexism in it. The short skirts and all that, the way that women can be objectified. And I'm like, that's true, but that was also part of the time in which it was made. So you have to look at what could they get away with on television in 1966, what was expected of them. And while there is a lot of that, there is a lot of beautiful women in scantily clad outfits, that was the time that Star Trek was made. And they still snuck a lot by us. I mean, there was some very interesting characters. There was a lot of female characters on that show that were doctors, that were lawyers, that were scientists. There were not a lot of, I mean, when I think about the characters like Roberta Lincoln, who Terry Garr played in Assignment Earth when she was coming to work for Robert Lansing's character, for Gary Seven. She was first shown as being like this kind of ditzy hippie, but she was also shown as being a capable and strong young woman in her own right, to the point where they were going to make a spin-off TV series where, as sophisticated and as advanced as Gary Seven was, that we were going to see that those two be on TV. And I get that. You're still looking at the time. You have to take that into consideration. And for the time when Star Trek was made, it was an incredibly sophisticated show, especially if you look at the other science fiction that was on at the time, and there wasn't much of it. So it was truly outstanding television for the time. Now, I understand you look at new Star Trek and how they're portraying things now that I mean, now everybody is trying to justify the way that the Federation is being portrayed. Bunch of assholes, really. But by doing that, you're fundamentally changing, like we talked about earlier, what Star Trek is. Now, by making the Earth or the situation that we're showing, you're making it's so on the nose. I mean, it's a lot harder to portray a optimistic future, especially when you're dealing with Earth sorting out its problems. I mean, Star Trek used to go out into the world and they would have to sort out their problems out into the universe. The universe, they would use the alien races, and those are the people that we would come across, and that would be how they dealt with the problems of today. It was allegorical. But I think, to me, it's like, well, let's make what's going on. It's not your mom's federation, or it's not your grandpa's federation. But that, to me, is so easy. It's not as creative. And I get what they're trying to do. But at the end of the day, part of what Star Trek's appeal is the aspirational nature of it. I'm sure by the end, they're going to try and show, see, Picard saves the day somehow. But it's like there's no facet of that future that hasn't been tainted. They've now decided everything, the Romulan sun exploding and whatever, has, like, the whole universe has been turned upside down and has been destroyed. And, well, it's the wake of the Dominion War. But, what the Dominion War did was it brought together the Alpha Quadrant. And I would have thought that there would be a new level of cooperation that we would have even seen after the war, that you would have had, the universe would have looked differently. But apparently not. What are you going to do? Anyway, it's kind of a bummer. But, yeah, I think you're right, Claude. I'll still fight the good fight. Anyway, I can't not. And I think that's a great letter. Great point to make. This letter comes from Stubble McShave, our man Stubble. Says, this is interesting. Greetings to the evangelist of entertainment enthusiasm, as well as to the Post-Geek Singularity. Wow. The evangelist of entertainment enthusiasm. I thought that I'd beat the drum for two historical epics that were made for television. What I'm talking about is the TV movie Ivanhoe that was shown on TV in 1982, and the war epic Gettysburg that had a limited theatrical release in 1993, but was primarily a miniseries for television. I have a certain fondness for Ivanhoe. Here in Sweden, it's been a tradition for almost 40 years to show it on television on New Year's Day. I know it by heart because I've seen it most of those times it's been shown, and I recognize that it's a fairly low-budget production. It does, however, feature some great acting from some top actors. Actors include James Mason, Michael Hordern, Sam Neill, John Rhys-Davies, Julian Glover, Olivia Hussey, Lizette Anthony, Stuart Wilson, and Anthony Andrews. Wow, that's a great cast. The story is based on Sir Walter Scott's epic tale of timeless romance and chivalry. It's also a tale of prejudice and superstition. The main character is Ivanhoe, Anthony Andrews, who is a knight of Saxon heritage, returning from the Crusades. He wants to reconcile with his father, Michael Hordern, who never forgave him for leaving to fight with a Norman king in a foreign land. He also wants to get back with his old girl, Lizette Anthony. It features the Jew, Isaac, James Mason, and his daughter, Rebecca, Olivia Hussey. Ivanhoe develops close bonds of friendship with Isaac. Rebecca and Ivanhoe develop feelings for each other during a period where they are prisoners and she is tending his wounds. In the prejudiced society, it's a love that can't lead anywhere. The story is set in the time period of Robin Hood, who has a secondary role in the story, and features the dispute between Prince John and his brother Richard the Lionheart, who is returning from captivity abroad to try and reclaim his throne. The main antagonists are three Norman knights under Prince John's control: Front de Boeuf, John Rhys-Davies, Maurice de Bracy, Stuart Wilson, and Brian de Bois-Gilbert, Sam Neill. There are some battles in the movie, but it's fairly low budget. I try and watch this each New Year's Day because of the pure story and the excellent acting. Anyway, the other TV movie I wanted to mention was the TV war miniseries Gettysburg that had a limited theatrical release in 1993. I love Gettysburg. From now on, I will refer to it as a movie. This movie never would have happened without Ted Turner. He more or less financed the whole thing. This also has a strong cast, although it's mostly American actors. Since this is based on the events around a war in 1863, the U.S. Civil War, there are basically no women in the movie. I think I spotted one. Anyway, the cast consists of names such as Jeff Daniels, Martin Sheen, Tom Berenger, Sam Elliott, Stephen Lang, Kevin Conway, Richard Jordan. Richard Jordan died from cancer soon after he filmed this movie. He, as Brigadier General Armistead, as Brigadier General Armistead, has a great scene with Tom Berenger, who plays General Longstreet. This was before the times of CGI, so when you have panning aerial shots of 40 or so cannons going off at once, it feels much more real than if it had been done with CGI. They were able to enlist the help of large groups of reenactors and were allowed to shoot it along the actual historical battle sites. There are several great acting scenes between different officers. For example, when General Robert E. Lee, Martin Sheen, is reprimanding a cavalry officer for neglecting his duties, I was most positively surprised by Tom Berenger, who plays Longstreet. The last time I saw him on this level was in Platoon. The movie has a great soundtrack written by Randy Edelman, and you should absolutely listen to it. Two things worth noting before you watch it. There are a lot of big beards and mustaches in this movie, and the running time is 254 minutes. Schedule an intermission or watch it in 2 sittings. I've heard that this movie is shown in some schools in the U.S., which is understandable since the Battle of Gettysburg is central to American history. For the Bond enthusiasts, I can mention that George Lazenby plays Major General Pettigrew. Ted Turner also has a cameo in the movie. In the final battle, he's seen for a short time before he's killed. That's all I wanted to say in the matter. Stubble McShave. Well, Stubble, that's pretty cool. I like that. Nelson Chiretta sent in a super chat and says, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. That is right. I definitely learned that from Ghostbusters. Yeah, that's good stuff. This is another letter that I don't know if I've read this before. Maybe I haven't. Nope. I have read that letter. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings to a conclusion this episode of Robservations, episode number 351. And before I end, though, I would be remiss if I did not mention that today, ladies and gentlemen, today, March 2nd, marks the 30th anniversary of the release of The Hunt for Red October. The first Tom Clancy book to make it to the big screen, the first Jack Ryan novel to make it to the big screen, also the first Jack Ryan novel. I love Hunt for Red October. It was directed, of course, by John McTiernan. It has an incredible score by Basil Polidoris. I love The Hunt for Red October. I love everything about The Hunt for Red October. I love the cast. I love the visual effects. I love everything about it. I can't believe it's 30 years old today. It is, of course, last week, the 4K disc. It's come out in 4K before, but the 4K steelbook, standalone steelbook, came out, and it is glorious. So, everyone, why not watch Hunt for Red October tonight? I want to thank all of my moderating staff. I want to thank the great Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank, of course, Greg Smith, who's building a 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder for the Emerald City Comic Con, which is coming up. And, of course, Jordy Lyons and Lewis Yu, who are active participants in these chats. They are great moderators. I love them all. I also want to recommend that you go to the Facebook page, the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, if you haven't already, and find the Richard, who does a great job moderating and putting stuff up and getting people involved. So does Greg, by the way. And I just want to thank you all for being here and supporting the channel in every way that you do. Send more letters to the Burnettwork.net website. I very much appreciate getting them. Please send me more videos. I will play them. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell. Oh, by the way, there are tickets for No Time to Die on sale, both in the UK and in American theaters now. You can get them. I will not be coming to England, unfortunately, because of work. And CinemaCon, I found out CinemaCon, I don't know if is going on at the same time. And we really should go to CinemaCon and see what the studios have for us, in assuming it doesn't get canceled, because that was very much worth doing last year, and I'm very much looking forward to going this year. And I did get my press credentials, so I will be at CinemaCon instead of going to England. So I apologize. I wanted to do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. But tickets are on sale both in the UK and for those of you who want to know, I will be going to the not even the first show. I'll be going to the 8:15 show at Universal in IMAX. That's where I'm going to be on April 9th, 8:15. Let's hope the coronavirus is contained by then, because I do not want to miss No Time to Die. Anyway, I want to remind all of you, first of all, hit like. Smash that like button if you like these chats. Please subscribe. Please hit the little bell so you know whenever I go on. And I also want to say, before I sign off, I want to say I very much appreciated people like Dave Cullen, the Dave Cullen Show. If you haven't watched Dave Cullen, I've really enjoyed his reviews on Star Trek Picard. He did one on the last episode that dropped the what was that episode called? J.J. Abrams' Impossible Mystery Box. He did another great review, so kudos to Dave Cullen. And yes, just remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, again, I thank everybody for supporting the channel. I will just say, as always, have a better day.